Chapter 5. The class struggle. It may seem unnecessary, even out of character, that at a convention of the party of the working class it is necessary to regard the centrality of the class struggle and the role of our class in it. But it is necessary. The very heart of the capitalist ideological booby trap is the continuing denial and camouflaging of the very existence of the class struggle. Companion to this is a theory of the deterioration and shriveling of the working class. There continue to be variations on this anti-working class theme. They come from the left, the right and the centre, each with its own disguise. We have been hearing a lot about covert operations lately, but the longest running cover-up is the ruling class attempt to cover up the main irreconcilable contradiction of capitalism, the contradiction that gives rise to the class struggle and the working class itself. There are also so-called left groupings whose main diet is downgrading the US working class. They rehash the old bourgeois nonsense that the US working class is opportunistic, that it is racist, that it has lost its historic place as the central revolutionary force. Centrality of class struggle. To deny the centrality of the class struggle is to deny the existence of the main contradiction of capitalism. The centrality of the class struggle, the main contradiction, and the role of the working class are inseparable components of the very essence of the capitalist system. There is no way to replace, to substitute, or bypass that hard rock of capitalist reality. For us, the main point of reference is the multinational, malefimal, younger and older style, working class, and the struggle it is engaged in. In our corner of the universe, there are celestial bodies other than the sun that create their own gravitational forces. But it is the power of the sun that creates and regulates the overall system, in which the satellite bodies each have an important place. Like the sun in the solar system, it is the class struggle and the working class that create the system in which all other forces, movements and struggles make their contributions to human progress. The different mass movements and struggles are separate. They have their own specific interests, demands, tactics and contributions. But like the planets around the sun, to be effective they have to relate to the main contradiction and to the class forces it gives rise to. More than ever, the working class today is the centre of gravity for all people's unity. The working class is bringing into its orbit all the great struggles of today. Thus, the main champion for democracy today is the working class. The working class brings a new content to the struggle for democracy. For example, in the Common National Assembly to stop plant closings, the question of public ownership is becoming a question of democracy, of curbing the power of the transnationals and guaranteeing the democratic right of people to live and work and have a decent standard of living and quality of life. The US working class has reached the 100 million mark, some 180 million including family members and dependents, and is still growing. We are a working class country. But while our class grows bigger, it also grows poorer. The 35-40 million poor who live under the poverty level are, by and large, workers. The last 10 years the class struggle 39 have been the decade of increased poverty. The average wages of young men between 20-24 years old plunged 30% between 1973 and 1984. For young Afro-American workers the drop is closer to 50%. During the Reagan years, 14 million workers lost their jobs because of plant closings. 60% of the new jobs Reagan boasts about pay below the poverty level. 57% of steel workers, 46% of miners, and 39% of factory workers have been laid off, many of them permanently. Most of the homeless are the millions of steel workers, auto workers, construction workers, and machinists and their families who have lost their jobs. Our present generation is the first in decades in which young workers have a lower standard of living than their parents. Quality of working class life been a decade of downward economic mobility. There are new millions of workers whose wages are below the minimum wage, and the minimum wage itself is below the official poverty level. Just to measure it has up to the minimum wage of 20 years ago, the present $3.35 per hour would have to be raised to $5.20 per hour. One of Reagan's worst legacies will be the fact that 7 million human beings have been added to the millions whose income is below the poverty level. Downward mobility can be measured in many ways. An example is the housing crisis. For 10 years or more there has been no construction of affordable housing for working people. It is an irony that as president, Carter did nothing to support funding for the construction of federally subsidized housing, but now he has joined a highly publicized church group that is renovating a handful of dilapidated apartments. The cost of a house has gone through the roof. The average price is now way beyond the reach of working class families. Close to 40% of all houses on the market in some suburbs are priced at over $1 million or more. The quality of working class life is deteriorating before our very eyes. This affects medical care, social services, public schools and colleges, housing, public transportation, the care of children and the elderly. The corporate drive for profits has polluted our air, our water, has deforested much of our nation, killing our lakes. Our rich topsoil gets washed away or poisoned. Whole residential areas, especially where workers live, find their homes and lives endangered by chemical dumps. The erosion of the overall living standard is a many-sided process. Continued decline in real wages, an increase in sweatshops and home industries, overall growth of non-union conditions where wages are 33% lower than union shops, an increase in the number of long-term unemployed as the hungry and homeless get hungrier, cuts in fringe benefits, cuts in food stamps, Medicare and welfare payments, spiralling of food prices, rents and other basic necessities, tax increases, worsening of conditions on the job. 23,000 workers were killed on the job in the last 5 years, increased racism, discrimination and attacks on affirmative action programs. All this adds up to a declining standard of living and untold human suffering. It is a downward economic mobility for the working people as a whole. The class struggle. 41 Afro-American workers. The downward mobility affects all workers, but both quantitatively and qualitatively the decline is most drastic among Afro-American workers. Many Afro-American communities are the new inner cities and ghost towns. Plant closings continue in industries and cities where there are large Afro-American commonwealth shops are deserting the Harlems, Yorks, Youngstowns, Detroits and Chicagos of our nitties country. Because of the devastation of the structural crisis, most Afro-American workers are without any job security. In greater numbers they are without unemployment benefits or medical insurance. They are the long-term unemployed. While there has been progress in the struggle against racism, it remains a critical obstacle to class unity. The Reagan-Mies offensive against affirmative action programs has had a crippling effect on the struggle for equality in hiring, on shop floor advancement. In a period when there is a decline in industrial jobs, the racist practice of last to be hired and first hope fired has an especially destructive impact. The struggle against racism and against the practice of racial discrimination remains a key element in the moulding of working class unity. This is not yet fully understood by all white workers. However, for many white workers, the question of the need for class unity can be the starting point for the struggle against racism. The problems related to declining jobs, elimination of job classifications, and the threat of plant closings adds a new dimension to the struggle against racism. During periods of expansion when there is hiring going on, it is easier to work out affirmative action programs for hiring and even advancement. During peri 42 odds of decline, it is necessary to come up with more basic arguments that spell out the longer-range benefits of class unity. The struggle must be directed towards making demands on the corporations for shorter hours, for affirmative action programs. They must be interwoven with demands for government-sponsored programs for retraining at union wages, for extension of unemployment benefits. It is necessary to work out a more all-inclusive program against the effects of racism. Such a program can be the basis of class unity. Women workers, the male-female working class, has become a permanent feature of our class scene. Women are now in the working class in equal numbers with men, but equality is still punched out on the time clock card. Women workers have reached about 45% of the workforce, but in most cases they still get 50% of the wage scale. The militancy of women workers has resulted in significant victories, like the equal pay victory in the state of Washington, which awarded $101 million in back pay and pay adjustments to 35,000 women workers. However, the majority of women workers work in industries and the service sectors where not only the wages are low, but where there are very few fringe benefits. Women workers bring into the working class many positive attributes. They bring a higher consciousness in areas like preservation of human life and issues of war and peace, greater interest and involvement in community issues, and a sharper focus on the relationship between the shop floor, family and neighbourhood. It is becoming ever clearer that the struggle for equality of women in the United States is closely tied class struggle 43 to the class struggle. This is where the main allies of the women's movement are. This is where its main cadre must come from. In a very special way, the struggles for women's equality are closely related to the struggle for equality of Afro-Americans, Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, and all racially and nationally oppressed people. The relations between the forces of the class struggle, the forces of the movement for racial equality and the movement for women's equality are a key element in the struggles in all areas of life. The overall inequality of women is supported and by the ideological concepts of male supremacy. It is an ideology pushed by monopoly capital. It is an instrument for the special oppression and rationalized exploitation of women. It is a tool in the drive for maximum profits. It is an obstacle to the development of class consciousness and class unity. In spite of some progress, in the United States the policies of inequality and discrimination are sickly intact. Still, women's equality remains a basic challenge. While all working class women are victims of by more than anyone else the Afro-American, Mexican-American, style exploitation and male supremacy, Puerto Rican and American Indian working class women are prisoners of special oppression and male supremacy. Because of these factors, the women's movement has a special responsibility in the struggle for black-white unity. In this, white women have a special responsibility in the fight against the influences of racism and chauvinism. Black-white unity in the struggle for women's equality can have a special influence on the struggle against racism in general. To the extent the struggles for equality of women are not related to the other components for social progress, to that extent the struggles for women's equality will not reach their fullest potential. Thus, the interrelationship and unity of the different components is the key to victories in all areas. This calls for tactics of many-sided unity of women, unity of men and women, black-white unity in the working class and unity with the working class. Economic equality for all women in the workforce is critical for the unity and power of the working class. Without such unity, the working class will not be able to fulfill the tasks history has assigned it. Other nationally oppressed workers, Puerto Rican workers in the United States, continue to labor at the lower half of the pay scale, and great numbers are part-time workers. Mexican American and the newer workers from the countries of Central America, the Caribbean and the 5 million Asian Pacific and rural special targets of the new immigration. Many in this sector of our working class are law, forced to work at below poverty level wages in service and light industry jobs. Besides the millions who work at below poverty level wages, there is an even lower wage scale sector growing, especially among nationally oppressed workers. The Reagan administration has removed most regulations from the slave-like home industries. Hidden from the public and unions, these workers are doing piecework without the protection of the government or trade unions, without any kind of benefits, at below survival wages. Nationally oppressed workers are a major source of super profits. The corporations pay them the lowest wages, no fringe benefits, and are not bound by any safety or health standards. Many of these workers are nationally oppressed women. Millions are on call, part-time workers. The class struggle 45 Reagan corporate offensive. The syndrome of downward mobility is a product of the Reagan corporate offensive. When asked whether the American people should have the right to the basic necessities of job, food and shelter, Reagan's Labor Secretary replied, "I think they have a right to seek these things. But I don't think they have a right to demand that they be provided. I don't recall anything in the Constitution about the right to a job. That says it all about the Reagan administration and the limitations of the U.S. Constitution." Incidentally, the constitutions of the evil empire in all the socialist countries have such lifetime guarantees as a job, food, clothing, shelter, education, medical care, child care. While it is not possible to set an exact date for the next cyclical crisis of overproduction, there can be no question that it will arrive. It is inevitable. It will strike all the major capitalist countries and have its impact on the whole capitalist world. It is also possible to say with some degree of certainty that this next one will be about 7.5 on the economic Richter scale, and there will be a period of prolonged economic aftershocks. Some factors that will usher in the crisis are the continuing decline in real wages, the increased rate of exploitation of labour, and the Reagan reductions in all socio-economic programs. In short, the declining standard of living for the majority and the pile-up of extreme wealth at the very top. The boom phase of the automobile production cycle has passed its peak. The housing boom is over and is shifting into a declining phase. Like the people in Florida and Louisiana, who board up their glass storefronts to prepare for oncoming hurricanes, the big banks all over the country are setting aside millions as insurance against defaulting loans that come with economic storms. There is no way to end the decline of jobs in industry or to restore the employment to earlier levels without a major reduction in the work week with no cut in pay. There will be no economic turnaround without wage increases. Hurricane prevention measures must include an end to overtime and a meaningful increase in the minimum wage. Some solutions private enterprise is the calls for plant closings. It is the obstacle to reopening them. This obstacle can only be removed by public takeover. There is no way to end the decline in affordable housing construction without a massive program of government housing construction in the millions of units per year. Such a program is needed to house the homeless, to clear the slums, to provide jobs, and to restore the steel, cement, construction equipment and trucking industries. The corporate solution to the increasing international competition brought on by the structural crisis is to dramatically reduce labor costs. For example, the head of GM went to Wall Street to announce GM will more production overseas, cut its workforce in half, cut US production, make more profits by selling less cars at higher prices. A recent New York Times business section editorial argued that profits and wages rise and fall together, and any union activity that impairs profits will cut wages, jobs and living standards. In the article, On the Eve of the Auto Talks, Putting an End to Adversarial Unionism, the chief economist for Risks, who is also a senior Heritage Foundation ideologue, put out the line, American labour shell class struggle 47 look within itself for answers to its problems and not to outside factors. Its philosophy of ever shorter hours, narrow job classifications and artificial workload limits is at odds with the work ethic and drags down the nation in its fight to stay competitive. He suggests that labour should drop adversarial unionism and practice enterprise unionism, like the Japanese and Swiss. They should defend and nurture the golden goose of profits. Only profitable and quite prospective employers create employees sibly. Union members. The corporate campaign to win these arguments takes the forms of the old wage and benefit concessions, but new and more insidious forms have emerged in the recent period which can have the effect of destroying unions or turning them into company unions. Going under the names of quality circles, teamwork, employee involvement programs, or labour management participation teams, the new corporate strategy is to radically alter the production process in line with new flexible manufacturing systems in order to simultaneously boost profits and productivity as they reduce the union to impotence on the shop floor. This has become a critical battleground in basic industry. Usually combined with profit sharing or gain sharing plans, these new forms of workplace organisation are designed to increase the rate of exploitation. At the same time, they undermine national industry-wide union contracts and shop steward systems. They seek to turn local unions and workers into accomplices for increasing profits in the name of competitiveness. Where it becomes necessary and feasible, the tactic should be to turn these negative corporate forms into positive instruments of struggle. But workers must never forget that these groups with neutral-sounding names are instruments of the bosses. These new corporate systems are a direct attack on industrial unionism at the very time when the trade union movement must make a stepped-up effort to strengthen industrial unionism and broaden its forms to take account of new types of corporate organisation, such as increased conglomerization and internationalization. These new corporate systems of organisation are designed to set workers at different plants in the same company and the same unions against each other. The trade union response must include 1. Increased wages and guaranteed employment to compensate for the increase in exploitation. 2. Redouble efforts to preserve the integrity of industry-wide master contracts, which deal with so-called local issues as well. And 3. New thinking on how unions and take control over these new types of workplace organisation through innovation in steward systems and new forms of in-plant struggles. Struggle for equality and working class unity. From all this it is clear the question of working class unity is the most critical of all the important questions we must deal with. Inequality is not only an instrument of superprofits, but a direct instrument of disunity. The many-sided struggle for equality is a necessary prerequisite for working class unity. The struggle for equality must take on the specific cases of inequality, but it must also create an atmosphere of equality. It must be concrete, but it must also be educational. It must fight for economic equality, but it must also let class struggle 49 be political and ideological. The struggle against inequality must fight for a program for demands, but it must also project slogans. We must help create a new mode of thinking about class unity. We must imaginatively link the issues that will promote and build new levels of class unity that are needed to go from defensive struggles to offensive struggles. We must project class unity as a precondition for the working class to be able to fulfill its historic role. We must do more in the struggle to eliminate racist influences in the ranks of the working class. In this struggle we must learn how to use objective developments as a framework for the struggle against racist influences. We must build on the advances. We must see the remaining influences of racism, but at the same time we must also see the declining influence of the poison. Following are a few examples of the declining influence of racism. One after a racist incident on the initiative of a white teacher, a local union of teachers in Pontiac, Michigan, all white, unanimously voted that the state legislature should ban distribution of Nazi and other hate literature. Lewis, white auto workers issued a statement condemning a racist attack on a black worker running for a local union office. 3. In Oakland, pipe fitters, faced with a plant closing and reopening in South Korea, joined a demonstration called by Korean Americans in support of democratic struggles in South Korea. These and the many more experiences that I'm sure will come out during the plenary, workshops and commissions at this convention are examples of actions and advanced consciousness that concretely too in street. Build class unity. 50 fresh wins versus the Afulcio basement framework, that we must examine whether we can be more helpful to the trade union movement. It is in this as a pivotal mass organisation of the working class. The new fresh winds that our trade union programme correctly forecast continue to blow. As with all winds, There are gusts up to 60 miles per hour, and there are also moments when one has to wet one's finger and hold it in the air to determine whether the wind is still blowing. What is new is that the gusts are stronger and come more often, and that the winds do not reverse themselves. But there are strong forces in the leadership of the FLCO that are very actively working to reverse the direction of the fresh winds. In the recent months they have become better organised, more persistent and outspoken. The International Affairs Department of the FLCO, under the right-wing leadership of Tong Khan, with the backing of Lane Kirkland, Albert Shanker and others, has gone all out to revive some of the old-class collaborationist policies, especially in giving support to the Reagan policies of imperialist aggression. The ideological departments of the SIA and the International Affairs Department of the FLCO are two sides of the same coin. They are spending huge sums of somebody's money to mobilise their forces to tip the scales at the upcoming FLCO convention in October. The struggle over Labour's participation in the April 25 demonstration was a trial run for the longer-range struggle. The class collaborationists lost that one. The largest contingents in both Washington and San Francisco were the trade unions. While the right-wing forces in the FLCO are the class struggle 51 coming increasingly isolated, it is still necessary for us to look at their activities in detail. It is one of those U.S. peculiarities that this inner department of the trade union movement operates, mainly covertly with its secret sources of money, like the SIA. None of its personnel are elected, and it supports an administration that is totally anti-union, both at home and abroad. Almost all the governments that were involved in the Iran-Contra conspiracy do not hesitate to murder trade unionists. And yet there is evidence that the International Affairs Department played its usual supporting role. There are more and more exposures linking the FLCO's International Affairs Department with a gang of gun runners who have been operating for years out of the White House basement. More and more evidence is coming to light, linking together International Affairs Department officials, members of Social Democrats, USA and the Poindexter Nord operations. These connections are becoming a growing embarrassment and threaten to expose further those in Labour's ranks who, in the name of anti-communism, secretly, and not so secretly, cooperated with the SIA and State Department in sabotaging Labour and people's movements here and abroad. The National Endowment for Democracy, the Labour arm of White House Contra funding operation, together with the American Institute for Free Labour Development AFLD, are almost extensions of the US State Department. They are directly implicated in both fundraising for the Contras and in the illegal use of public money to target, pressure and defeat Democratic swing votes in the House of Representatives. The Reagan bootlickers in Labour support an administration that not only went all out to break a strike, but Unity the Only Way destroyed a union, PATCO, in the process. They are in cahoots with an administration that is proposing to take over the Teamsters Union, to put it under Mussolini-like government control. Then it can be used as a precedent for taking over the trade union movement as a whole, a proposal that is disturbingly similar to the administration's policy of replacing governors and mayors with colonels and admirals under a so-called national emergency. The right-wing forces in the trade union movement have launched a new effort to gather their forces and are therefore a greater threat. But the fresh winds that blow in opposition to the right wing continue, and they have many currents. The Industrial Union Department of the FLCO has launched a major counterattack on overall questions of jobs, wages and the right to organise. The Jobs with Justice Drive, which grew out of the April 25 demonstration, calls for rallies, picket lines and lobbying. This is an important initiative because there has been a loud demand in the grassroots for such leadership. It is an effort to mobilise both the organised and unorganised, an effort to build a political and ideological base for offensive struggles. It is seen as a campaign to mobilise, agitate and educate. The fresh winds are getting strong support from such organisations as Coalition of Black Trade Unionists CUPTU and Coalition of Labour Union Women CLU. On many questions CUPTU and CLU take more advanced positions than the trade union leadership as a whole. United working just front the forces that welcome and support the fresh winds are not of one mind. They do not always support all the currents. At times some are momentarily affected by right-wing countercurrents. Therefore, the overall class struggle 53 tactics must move in the direction of achieving a unity that can encompass differences. That should be the very essence of the tactics of a united class front policy. The fresh winds and changing thought patterns are creating a new magnetic force by which to adjust the working class compass. A united class front policy must be the approach to all struggles, from economic struggles on the shop floor to the contract negotiating table. A united class front policy must be the underpinning for the trade union pacts, for the electoral tactic of political independence. There are some new factors that have a negative impact on the unity of the working class. The structural crisis, plant closings, and the relocation of manufacturing facilities to non-union areas all wiped out whole sections of the trade union movement. Since Reagan came into office, almost 2 million union jobs have been wiped out. The number of union construction workers has fallen by about 500,000, and the number of non-union construction workers has increased by about the same number. Unorganized auto plants, steel mini mills, and whole sections of the electrical industry are unorganized. This non-union bridgehead presents a serious problem for the trade union movement and for our party. It saps the strength of the unionized sector. It is a serious challenge to the unity of the class. In its overall class interests, the trade union movement must find the resources to set up a well-planned program of organizing the unorganized. Another new and growing factor affecting working class and trade union unity is the permanently unemployed, millions of whom are homeless and hungry. The number of permanently unemployed workers grows even during the boom phase of the economic cycle. These are also unorganized workers. The trade union movement can ignore the growing army of unemployed only at its own peril. The corporations discard workers, but the trade unions must not. We must help to find ways to create the organized link between the three components: unity between the unorganized, unemployed, and the trade union movement. That which challenges the working class and trade union movement is as much a challenge to us communists. It is a challenge to all left forces. We cannot meet our responsibilities by lecturing or pointing the finger at trade union leaders. We must help to find the path to working class unity that will include the sections that are now drifting. Update: mass thought patterns. Because of the fresh winds in the trade union movement, it is necessary to update our assessment of working class mass thought patterns. Objective developments have narrowed down the influence of the right wing. Thus, in the grassroots, the influence of the right wing on most questions has become rather thin. This is a most important development. An important section of the top leadership is still very much right-wing and class collaborationist, both in domestic and foreign policy issues. But a growing section of the top and especially the middle layer of leadership is moving in a progressive direction, in both domestic and foreign affairs. Because of the changing thought patterns, the membership and the working class grassroots in general increasingly respond to tactics of class struggle, class unity and class political independence. They join in the struggles for ending the nuclear arms race. 27 internationals are officially the class struggle, 55 part of the nuclear freeze movement. They join in the struggles against U.S. policies that support the racist regime in South Africa and the Contras in Central America. The initiative by Labour Today and trade unionists for action and democracy to organise a national assembly to stop plant closings can develop into a broad-based movement for a militant fight against plant closings. The Jobs with Justice campaign is a direct challenge to class collaboration and is already capturing the imagination of many trade unionists as well as grassroots workmanship and leadership in community organisations. On most of the big issues, to one extent or another, the grassroots take issue with the right-wing positions of the Kirklands and Shankers. To a large extent, the grassroots has moved to the positions that were thought patterns of the centre forces in past years. Then there is the growing broad left sector in the ranks of the leadership, but even more so in the grassroots. This broader left element now encompasses much of what also were called centre positions. Because of these changing thought patterns, it is more difficult and unnecessary to speak of a right, a centre and a left. Making a distinction between the bulk of the membership and those who are centre forces has largely lost its meaning. In today's context, the old centre concept does not leave enough room for the broader left development. And the thought patterns which were considered centre in the past have now become the thought patterns of the bulk of the trade union membership and much of the leadership, and the broader left now occupies part of that domain also. In other words, it seems to me the thought that 56 turns have changed to where the bulk of the trade union movement is reaching the point where it is not necessary, or even correct, to distinguish the great majority from a separate, designated centre section. Therefore, what is called for as the main tactical approach is the organisation and mobilisation of the united working class. Thought patterns have changed enough so that the appeal on most questions can be made to the whole class, to all members of the trade union movement. Hence the concept of a united working class front. And, associated with an integral part of this united class is a left sector that has grown and is still growing, thus, an appeal to a united left to give leadership to a united working class front. This shift in tactics raises the importance of and makes it possible to work more within the trade union structure, to work within local unions, within central labour and state bodies. Thought patterns have shifted to where most of the issues that unite the left forces can be raised within locals, within central and state labour bodies. The united left forces should now think in terms of moving the whole trade union movement In fact, the whole trade union grassroots can be mobilized in the struggle against the right wing. These new thought patterns are not yet fully developed, but the direction is clear. They will continue to refresh the fresh winds, building left unity for millions of workers up against incredible odds in their battles with the transnationals and finance capital, with the union busters, corporate takeover thugs. United, it is becoming clearer every day that unity working class front is the only way to beat them. It is both a product of and a spur to the fight against racism. It is also a product of and spur to the decline of anti-communism in the labour movement. What is heard more and more in discussions with trade unionists is the idea that I may not agree with you on everything, but we can and must work together. There is an enormous respect for the history of the left in our trade union movement. The period of the CO and the militant leadership provided by the left is looked upon as the example of what we should be doing today. More and more the right-wing Kirkland or Shanker and the right-wing Social Democrats seen as the saboteurs of unity in the trade union movement, not the left. This desire to close ranks in the battle is a powerful force, and it includes not only the desire for unity within the trade union movement, but also unity with the broader forces represented by civil rights, church, women's, seniors and youth organisations. What developed around April 25th, the coalition of Labour and the churches, is a good example. Now the Jobs with Justice campaign that calls upon all who can be part of the anti-monopoly fight to join with the labour movement is a continuation of this. The dozen international unions and the Industrial Union Department of LCO who have formed this campaign are responding to the left thought patterns among their millions of members. As a result of all this, we are seeing a deeper class consciousness developing among the working class, and particularly among the organised sector of the class. By and large, these are left thought patterns. How else would you describe the thought patterns of the nearly 175 trade unionists who marched on April 25? These trade unionists clearly made the connection between their own bread and butter issues there and the anti-impa battles against the transnationals' realist fight of the people of South Africa and Central America. They represent the outlook of millions of other trade unionists. When we broaden our sights to include the enormous 100 million strong working class, we can begin to see that we are dealing with a different working class population today, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Without left, nowhere to go. At our last convention in 1983, in the section of the main report on building the left and centre unity, we said, left-centre forms are now increasingly possible and necessary. But without left forms, even such important concepts have nowhere to go. A trade union movement without left forms is like a person trying to jog with only one leg. The centre forces continue to be a viable force in the ranks of the working class and trade union movement. The centre forces of today are not the same as those of years ago. Generally, they are less influenced by right-wing elements. They waver on foreign policy issues. Many are still influenced by anti-communism and racism. They are more militant on domestic issues. Nothing moves in a vacuum. Forces move either because they are repelled or attracted. Today, centre forces are increasingly repelled by the right-wing forces. Therefore, it is clear that while they are stimulated by addictive factors, while they are reacting to class struggle issues, 59 how fast they will move, on what issues they will move and what forms the movement will take depends largely on their relationship with left forces. In working for left unity, we are working with and giving direction to trends that are already in motion. We are not inventing these trends. This process we described so accurately 4 years ago has now come to fruition. It is a much more clearly defined development. The centre forces have continued to mature to the point where they are now much of the membership. The left forces, moving with trends already in motion, have grown, given leadership, developed organised forms and moved towards greater and greater unity with other forces and movements. Thus, the terms we use, our definition and description of left as well as centre has become too narrow. Today the left is different. If we continue to see the left as a small, narrow group, then there is no room for the Communist Party. As a matter of fact, we can only see the united working class front if we see the left more broadly. To match the shift, our programmes, slogans and tactics have to be looser, broader and more flexible. The loosening up of our tactics must be based on our assessment of changing thought patterns. Let me now discuss how we see this shift in relation to left unity in all mass movements and people's struggles. We are for unity of the left forces in the peace movement. It is obvious that large sections of the population who are for ending the nuclear arms race now identify with and relate to the more advanced left positions. Therefore, the left peace forces must break out of unity. They're the only way. Narrow, sectarian, cloistered isolation. Only in this way can it also break out of the crisis of inaction on the peace front. We are for left unity with the left forces in the Afro-American community and movements. On issues directly related to the struggle for equality, the great majority of Afro-Americans relate to and support left positions. This does not mean we do not need organized left forms. Without left forms, the organized positions on issues cannot be molded. There is a need for organized left forms working with the Afro-American movements. The same approach and the forms to fit are needed to organize the left forces among Mexican American, Puerto Rican, American Indian and Asian Pacific people of advanced poles. National oppression, especially with the devastating effects of Reaganism, has created an anger and militancy, and with this a growing anti-imperialist, anti-monopoly and class-conscious sector in these movements. Thus, there is now a left and the basis for an organized left and left unity in the movements of the nationally oppressed. We are for left unity in the youth movement. Because of the objective developments that are destroying all hopes for reaching the American dream, it is necessary to think now in terms of all youth unity. A united left sector must be a part of and work within the concept of unity of the young generation. As the struggles for women's equality have moved into the arena of the class struggle and politics, the women's movement has become an important political force. Women have become a greater force in the moulding of working class unity. Women have become a recognized force in all other areas of struggle. But today there is a broad movement and an event class struggle 61 broader consensus that takes in the great majority of women. Within this broad consensus there is a growing left sector. Therefore, there is the need for a united left force. More left forces are gravitating toward organized women for racial and economic equality and the coalition of labor union women CLU. The breadth and depth of the 200-member U.S. delegation to the recent International Women's Peace Conference in Moscow was a demonstration of shins like the changing thought patterns. Thus, it is now necessary for the party and other left forces to take a new look to see whether the present left forms in all the movements and struggles are broad enough, whether they are still adequate to give leadership to both the expanding movements and to a united left. The same kind of examination is called for in our work among farmers. The farm crisis has had a deepening effect on the thought patterns in the farm communities, because it has caused so much personal suffering to so many farm families. There is a rising anger and the kind of militancy that leads to action. What is most important is that the farm organizations have taken the initiative in the efforts toward farmer labor unity. As a result of hard times, struggle and protest, there is a growing left sector among the farmers. Our comrades working in this area must take initiatives to help give organized form to this growing left farm sector. We can see an emerging left sector in most mass movements today, in the seniors movement, health care, public education, in the church movements and among the growing sector of the permanently unemployed. As these sectors blossom, we must help give them form and tactics so they can become a recognized leading force in advancing all movements and all 62 people's unity. The united majorities can develop their muscle only if there are organized left forms working with them. Whole political ideological stumbling blocks in our consideration of these developments, it is necessary to take into account that there are still some obstacles to left unity. Anti-Sovietism has long been such an obstacle. However, with the new U.S. peace majority, the decline in anti-Sovietism, and the new interest in socialist developments, the possibilities for broad left unity have increased greatly. Today, those who stand in the way of such unity are becoming increasingly isolated. Anti-communism is not as effective now. It has lost its ability to separate Labour from its allies and to maintain long-standing divisions in Labour's own ranks. Those who continue to make anti-communism the primary question for Labour in place of the battle against the transnationals will either soon become irrelevant or will get thrown out of the path of progress. As is the case with all alliances or coalitions, in order to build left unity there has to be an underlying basis of agreement, a common understanding about the issues on which the foundation for unity is laid. The purpose of a united left alliance is to help give effective leadership to broader forces and to organise more advanced forms of struggle. However, this left leadership must be constructive, not provocative, destructive, divisive, manipulative or anti-communist party. The phony, anti-party left for the time being, many of the small left groupings have pulled in their anti-Soviet horns. For most this is a tactical manoeuvre. Because of the overall decline in anti-Sovietism and because the base for these the class struggle 63 men's has narrowed down, it is now difficult for a phony left grouping to be anti-Soviet and maintain any credibility with broader forces. There are phony left groupings that come and go. They are phony because on the one hand they use Marxist phrases, but on the other hand they are anti-working class and anti-communist party. They take opportunistic positions with left covers on most questions, but they spend most of their time attacking the positions of the Communist Party, OSA. Their attacks on the Communist Party are an opportunistic concession to the reactionary forces. These groupings have no real following, so they become leeches, attaching themselves to organizations and movements, making provocative appearances at mass meetings, distributing their anti-communist party diatribes. Most of these grouplets continue the old Trotskyite most still pert policy of take over and destroy. So, some now say they want to work with the party. But that is also phony, because at the very time they are talking about working with the party, they are working to take over and destroy it. Anyone who is honest and has honest differences tactic of disrupting united movements with the party, but is not out to slander or disrupt the party, will have no problems working in mass movements with communists. However, dishonest or enemy class forces express their so-called differences in ways that aim to divide and destroy. Anyone can work with the party. However, we want to make it clear that we will not permit anyone to use the party for narrow, sectarian, disruptive purposes. In fact, if some honest left forces have no basic differences with the party, then really the natural thing for them to do is join the party. At times like these, when the conditions in Senti 64 men's are crying out for left unity, we will not permit these small, dishonest, destructive, provocative sects to place obstacles in the way of working toward a united working class front. The more concrete, definitive forms of unity will materialize as we work among left forces in all the movements. It is clear there is a new basis for unity of movements and struggles on the basis of issues, positions, actions and honesty. With this understanding, our party must and will become an active, constructive and mobilizing force in all left forces, in all organizing the new concepts of left unity, the united all people's unity, with a united working class front, bringing to the fore the power and oneness of our multiracial, multinational, male-female working class. Thought patterns on racism. There are continuing changes in thought patterns related to racism. On the one hand, there are the violent racist outbursts that are stimulated by the atmosphere created by Reagan-Mies racist acts and agitation. Reflecting the same atmosphere is the rash of racist police violence and police killings. On the other hand, according to recent public opinion polls, the majority of white Americans are against inequality. All do not yet see affirmative action as the solution to undo inequality, a weakness we must relentlessly struggle to overcome. Nevertheless, shows how white people are moving leftward, including against overt racism, but like swimmers moving with the current in a rapid river, they sometimes get caught in whirlpools. Tens of millions of white workers have now had experience in working side by side with their black counterparts. The days of legal Jim Crow mines and mills, schools and public facilities have been gone forth class struggle 65 quite a while. This interracial contact has added to the developing anti-racist consciousness among white workers. This organization of the struggle against racism, especially acts of racist violence, is essential because large sections of white masses do not have generations of experience in being against racism. The experiences in Cleveland, Detroit, Howard Beach and Atlanta prove that it is now possible to move white workers to challenge the racists directly. And when this happens, the racist elements retreat. This should give us confidence to take bold initiatives when racist violence takes place. But it also raises questions about preventive actions. There is a need for broad movements against racism. And there is also a need for organized left leadership, program and forms. National oppression 8. Anti-Semitism. The rise in national oppression is reflected in the increase in national chauvinism against Puerto Rican, Mexican American, Asian Pacific, American Indian and all nationally oppressed peoples. It is expressed in rising incidents of violence and harassment in the slave labor sweatshops, brutal home industries and farm labor conditions, in the implementation of the anti-labor, racist aspects of the new immigration law. It can be seen in the terrible poverty and suffering in the barrios, ghettos and on the reservations across our land. On the other hand, there is the growth of movements and organizations that are taking on the violence, harassment and brutal working conditions imposed by the super-profit-seeking corporations. And there is the growing coming together of the nationally oppressed and the trade union movement. This adds an important new dimension to political independence, partly because of the public response to Israel's role in Irangate and the Pollard spy case. There is a rise in anti-Semitic sentiments that are being used as a tool by the ultra-right, for example, in the Farm Belt in an attempt to blame the farm crisis on Jewish bankers. The Wall Street Journal keeps pointing to the ethnic background of the incidents of anti-Semitism. Wall Street insiders. Bigotry and prejudice against Jewish Americans usually accompany a rise in racism and an atmosphere that feeds racism and anti-Semitism. Therefore, unity, which has been historically the case, is natural and necessary. The recent convention of the Progressive New Jewish Agenda stressed the need for unity with labor and with all sections of the nationally oppressed, challenging the influence of Zionism. This is the kind of left unity that can give the lead in building all people's unity against racism, anti-Semitism and all forms of discrimination. Thought patterns in the farm community. If current trends and government policies continue, the family farmer, already an endangered species, will be almost extinct in a matter of 10 years, and the repercussions will reach far beyond the countryside where the pockets of the consumers. Thousands of jobs will be lost. Throughout this century, a steady trickle of Americans have left farming. But during the March 25, 2024, this trickle swelled into a flood as the Farm Belt struggled with the worst economic crisis since the 1930s depression. About 400 family farms have been forced out of business in the past 6 years. Today, one-third of class struggle. 67 the nation's 600 moderate-sized family farms are in serious trouble, and nearly 20 people are giving up farming every week. Every farm loss wipes out about 5 non-farm jobs, most of them in the same locality. More than 65 workers in the agricultural implement business have lost their jobs in the past 6 years, a 62% decline. For every 5 to 7 farms going under, one mainstream business shuts its doors. The net income of American farmers will drop by 35% in the next 4 years if government farm policy is not changed for the better. About 60% of today's farmers must have non-farm income to maintain themselves on their land. Farm wives are often forced to take low-paid jobs in town, leaving children without any nearby neighbors. If nothing is done, U.S. agriculture will be completely dominated by giant corporations. A mere 50 large agribusiness farms owned by absentee landlords and operated by day laborers will account for 75% of the nation's agricultural production. The farm crisis and the unity of farm organizations and farmers demanding a change in federal farm policy was a vital factor in the outcome of the national elections. The unity of farmers and labor in rallies and demonstrations demonstrates the power of such an alliance. The Save the Family Farm Bill Harkin Gephardt has the overwhelming support of all progressive farm organizations and coalitions of church, community, education, senior citizens and labor groups. The bill faces strong opposition from grain trading and food processing monopolies, railroads and the transportation lobby. They are helped by those who, in the name of opposing the raising of food prices, by limiting supply are mobilizing support against the bill. When the bill was before the 99th Congress, the only group that gave it support was the AFL-CIO. Some pro-peace representatives voted against the bill and helped defeat it. If this bill is to be enacted, it is important for our party to help the trade unions mobilize the consumer, peace, women and senior groups to support it. In order to do this, we must launch a campaign to show that food prices in the supermarkets bear no relation with farm prices. In all these struggles to save the family farm, the new element has been unity of the farmers, farm organizations, farm families, communities and the unity of farmers with labor. The task for the future is to help develop the left sector to give leadership to the farm forces now in motion and advance toward an all-people's unity to save the family farm. Youthful thought patterns. The thought patterns of youth are being shaped by 2 primary factors, the growing nuclear threat and the general insecurity of life brought on by the triple-layered crisis. The instinct for self-preservation has influenced the thinking of young people maybe more than any other sector. The thinking of youth generally continues to develop in a progressive direction. The thinking of youth is shaped by the downward mobility of the working class that is hitting the youth especially hard. Unemployment is still hovering around 24% and the homeless crisis hits youth especially hard. There is growing trend of hopelessness that stems from the situation facing many youth. Because of the growing anxiety, anger and hopelessness, youth are searching for solutions through struggle. There is a growing support of trade union struggles by students who tend to accept and look to the leading role of labour in coalitions. There is a growing anti-racist merit among youth. The class struggle. 69 These developments are reflected in a level of growth of the Young Communist League unlike anything since its founding. In a number of places, ICLers are becoming leading personalities. ICLers are being elected to student governments and to the leadership of other mass organizations. The ICL is increasingly being sought out by coalitions. In some instances, the ING force on campus. This ICL is now the lead, especially true in the struggle against racism. The ICL is stepping up its drive to become a more militant and action-oriented organization, in keeping with the developing thought patterns among youth. At a recent meeting, the ICL made a decision to place greater emphasis on its work on the university campuses. This was in keeping with the long-term changes which have taken place in the character of the student body and in line with the policy of industrial concentration of the party. Greater emphasis on the campuses will lead to acceleration in the growth of the ICL. It will provide the ICL with a strong layer of new cadre. The party, almost every district, must change its attitude toward the ICL and youth work, especially in view of the stepped-up activities and the new stature, influence and growth of the ICL. We in the party have to put an end to the attitude that sees youth work as akin to being in the minor leagues, while seeing party work as the majors. Adding the communist plus to youth work means building the IC. Every district and club must have a plan of work for building the ICL. Party districts and clubs must assign cadre to it. Once cadre are assigned, close attention by the party leadership is called for. This is especially so on the campuses where party professors should be helping the ICL to establish study groups, hold mass meetings, print newsletters. Where study groups have been set up, they yield results. The party should consider selecting 25 key campuses across the country for building the party and IC. It would mean districts would adopt concentration universities and develop plans of work. The tactic of all youth unity and organised left forms within it must be the basis for the work of our party and the ICL in work among youth. Senior thought patterns. The older population has become an increasingly larger part of the total population. There are 35 million recipients of Social Security. The elderly are increasingly the victims of poverty, homelessness, illness and crime. The senior population is increasingly organised and active on the economic front, but also in the struggles and actions for peace and democracy. Seniors are important participants in the electoral process. Generally, they vote against right-wing candidates. But, as the last election showed, that cannot be taken for granted. The elderly are active and militant in the fight to stop cuts in Social Security, healthcare, Medicare, home care, housing and transportation. Senior party members are influential members of mass organisations. They have prestige and influence both in organisations and among public officials. They initiate advanced positions, legislation and programmes which are adopted by mass organisations. They appear on radio, television and in the editorial pages of major newspapers. However, because the party has not been able to re-establish a national senior commission, the work has suffered. Some districts have now established commissions and there is a concentrated effort to establish a national collective. The class struggle 7-1. The senior movement is an all-class movement, with the working class and unions playing a leading role. Black-white unity within the organised sector of seniors is critical to their active, progressive role. The senior movement is an essential part of the all people's movements and unity against reaction and Reaganism. As in other sectors, there is the need for tactics of all seniors' unity as well as organised forms of left unity. Changing thought patterns and mass culture developments on the cultural front are so reflective of the changing thought patterns that we can now speak about a new mass peoples and working class culture emerging as a dominant force. The changing thought patterns on peace, intervention, social justice and equality are expressed in music, in film, theatre, radio and television. For example, Bruce Springsteen continues to lend his name and large sums of money to support Struga and their unions. Growing list of US and British musicians have toured the Soviet uncles of Workers' Iron. Well-known artists whose albums sell millions of copies are singing songs that are anti-imperialist, anti-arrogant, anti-racist, anti-apartheid, anti-corruption, pro-democracy and pro-working class. By the way, you should not miss the tapes of beautiful, communist and working class people's songs by Comrade Bernice Tiskin. Another development is the surge in films that deal directly with disarmament and against US intervention in Central America, from War Games to Spies Like Us, to Amazing Grace and Chuck Supermana, Latino, Salvador, and The Official Story. Even on Broadway, plays like Broadway Bound and I'm Not Rappaport, which have won awards, 72 have working class, anti-racist and other themes that deal with peace and social justice. Compared with the cultural scene of only a few years ago, the difference is striking. These widespread changes were seen during this year's award ceremonies for film and music, where political statements were sprinkled among the acceptance speeches and performances. In addition, the militancy and strike struggles of actors, musicians, directors and news writers and technicians add another dimension to the picture of a changing cultural and mass media scene that we must work to influence and unify.